When a woman stops reaching out to a man, something very interesting starts happening in his mind. At first, he might not say anything about it. In fact, on the outside, he might look completely normal, like nothing has changed. But inside his mind, there is a quiet conversation starting to take place. Men are creatures of habit. When they are used to hearing from someone, whether it is a message in the morning, a check-in during the day, or a simple conversation at night, that pattern becomes part of their routine. When that routine suddenly disappears, the mind notices immediately. At the beginning, a man may think it is just temporary. Maybe he tells himself that you are busy. Maybe you have work, family matters, or something important going on in your life. He might wait for a little while, expecting your message to arrive just like it always does. But when the silence continues, his thoughts slowly begin to shift. He starts to question the situation. The human mind naturally tries to find explanations when something feels different. And for a man who is used to your attention, the absence of it becomes a puzzle he wants to solve. One of the first things that crosses his mind is whether he still matters to you. Men do not always talk openly about their emotions, but that does not mean they do not feel them. When the person who used to show interest suddenly becomes quiet, it can make him wonder if something has changed in your feelings. He might replay the last few conversations the two of you had together. He might think about the last message he sent. He begins asking himself silent questions. Did he say something wrong? Did he ignore something important you shared? Did he take your presence for granted? Even if a man has a strong personality or a confident exterior, silence from someone important to him can create a sense of uncertainty. Confidence does not eliminate curiosity. The more time passes without hearing from you, the more he becomes aware of the gap. The mind starts paying attention to small details it once ignored. He may scroll through previous messages, reading them again, trying to understand the tone of the conversation. Something that once felt normal suddenly becomes meaningful because he is searching for clues. At this stage, the silence begins to create emotional awareness. Sometimes men do not fully realize the value of someone's presence until it is no longer constant. When a woman regularly reaches out, checks on him, or shows interest in his day, it creates a sense of connection that becomes familiar. When that connection suddenly stops, the difference becomes noticeable. It is like walking into a room where the music was always playing and suddenly everything is quiet. The silence feels louder than the sound ever did. As the days pass, he may begin thinking about you more often than he expected. Not necessarily because he planned to, but because unanswered questions naturally stay in the mind longer than clear answers. The brain likes closure. When something feels unfinished, it keeps returning to the same thought again and again. A simple absence of contact can therefore become a powerful trigger for reflection. He might wonder what you are doing, who you are talking to, and whether you are moving forward in life without him noticing. At the same time, a man's pride might prevent him from immediately reaching out. Pride is a strong force in many people, especially in situations where emotions feel uncertain. Instead of asking directly what happened, he may choose to wait and see if you contact him first. During that waiting period, the thoughts continue building quietly in his mind. Each day without communication becomes another moment where he reflects on the situation. Eventually, the silence begins to shift his perspective. Things he once overlooked might start to appear important. He may remember the way you supported him during difficult moments, or the way you showed genuine interest in his goals and plans. Sometimes people only realize the weight of someone's presence when they experience life without it. What once felt ordinary now feels meaningful because it is missing. There is also another psychological element that comes into play. When attention is consistently available, the mind can become accustomed to it. But when attention disappears, the brain reacts differently. Scarcity often increases perceived value. When something becomes less available, people naturally become more aware of it. This does not mean manipulation, it simply reflects how human psychology responds to change. When your voice, messages, or presence are no longer constant, he may begin noticing how often he used to rely on that connection. During this time, he may also start observing his own feelings more closely. Before the silence, he might not have stopped to evaluate how important you were in his life. Daily routines often move quickly, leaving little time for reflection. But when communication slows down or stops, the mind gains space to think. That space allows him to ask deeper questions about the relationship and about his own emotions. Some men will realize that they genuinely miss the connection. They may begin to feel that something important is absent from their daily routine. Others might simply feel curiosity about why things change so suddenly. Either way, the silence forces him to acknowledge that your presence had an impact on his life. The absence of your messages becomes a reminder that you were part of his everyday world. In many situations, this awareness leads to a moment of realization. He begins to see the value of consistent communication and emotional connection. Sometimes it encourages him to take action, to reach out and reconnect, because he understands that relationships require effort from both sides. The silence becomes a mirror that reflects the importance of what once existed between the two of you. And in that quiet space where there are no messages and no immediate answers, a man's mind slowly moves from confusion to reflection. What started as simple silence becomes a moment where he recognizes that the attention and presence you once gave were not small things. They were signals that he mattered to someone. And when those signals disappear, the mind naturally begins to search for their meaning. When a woman suddenly stops reaching out, something subtle but powerful begins to happen in a man's mind. At first, he may not even recognize the shift. Men often try to appear calm and unaffected, especially when it comes to emotions or relationship dynamics. But internally, his curiosity slowly begins to wake up. Human beings are naturally drawn to patterns. When someone is used to receiving attention, messages, or communication from a particular person, it creates an expectation. When that expectation is interrupted, the brain immediately notices that something is different. In the beginning, he may think it is nothing. He might assume you are busy or dealing with something in your life. After all, people do not always communicate every day, and sometimes there are natural pauses in conversation. But when the silence continues longer than usual, his mind starts paying closer attention. What once felt normal is now replaced with uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of capturing a person's focus. Curiosity begins quietly. He may check his phone more often than he realizes, wondering if your name will appear on the screen. Even if he tries to distract himself with work, friends, or daily responsibilities, there is a small part of his mind that keeps asking questions. The absence of communication becomes noticeable because it breaks the routine he was used to. One of the strongest forces in this situation is the male ego. Ego is not always about arrogance. It is often about identity and pride. Many men like to feel that they have a certain level of influence in a relationship. They may believe that they understand the rhythm of the connection and how things usually flow between the two of you. When a woman who used to reach out suddenly stops, it disrupts that sense of certainty. Suddenly, he cannot predict what is happening anymore. This is where curiosity grows stronger. The mind naturally tries to fill in the blanks when information is missing. He might start replaying conversations in his head, trying to remember if there was a moment where things felt different. Did he ignore something you said? Did he fail to respond in the way you expected? Did something happen that made you pull back? The more he thinks about it, the more questions appear. What makes curiosity even more powerful is the mystery created by silence. When someone explains their feelings clearly, the situation becomes easier to understand. But when there is no explanation, the mind begins imagining possibilities. He may wonder whether you are upset, whether you are losing interest, or whether you are simply focusing on other parts of your life. Because he does not have clear answers, his thoughts continue returning to the same question. Why did she stop reaching out? Another interesting thing happens during this time. The less available you become, the more noticeable your absence feels. This is a common psychological reaction. When something is always present, people can become comfortable with it. But when that presence disappears, its value becomes more visible. A man who once took your messages for granted may suddenly realize how often he looked forward to them without even thinking about it. Curiosity is also connected to emotional investment. Even if he has not openly expressed strong feelings, your silence can make him aware of how much attention he was giving to the relationship. When communication was frequent, everything flowed naturally. But now that the flow has stopped, he begins to see the connection from a different perspective. The change forces him to observe his own reactions. At the same time, his ego may struggle with the situation. Part of him might want to reach out immediately and ask what is going on. But another part of him might hesitate. Pride can make people wait longer than they should. He might tell himself that if you stop contacting him, then you should be the one to start the conversation again. This internal conflict creates tension between curiosity and pride. While this internal debate continues, you may occupy more space in his thoughts than before. Not necessarily because he planned it, but because the mind is trying to resolve the mystery. When something feels unfinished or unexplained, the brain keeps returning to it. Silence becomes a question that has not yet been answered. He may also start paying attention to small details that previously seemed unimportant. For example, he might remember certain things you said during earlier conversations. He might think about your personality, your habits, or the way you interacted with him. These memories become more vivid because he is trying to understand the change in your behavior. The longer the silence lasts, the more it challenges his expectations. If he believed that you would always be the one reaching out first, your absence proves that things are not as predictable as he assumed. This realization can shift the balance of attention. Instead of you thinking about him, he may find himself thinking about you more often. Curiosity has a powerful effect on the human mind because it seeks resolution. People naturally want to close the gap between what they know and what they do not know. When communication suddenly stops, that gap becomes larger. Until it is filled with answers, the mind keeps returning to the same thoughts. Over time, this curiosity can lead to deeper reflection. He may begin to realize that your presence was not just casual conversation, but part of a meaningful connection. The mystery of your silence becomes a reminder that relationships are influenced by effort, communication, and attention from both sides. In that quiet space where messages are no longer arriving, his ego and curiosity continue to interact. One side of him wants to understand what happened, while the other side wants to maintain control and avoid appearing vulnerable. Between those two forces, your absence becomes something he cannot easily ignore. The silence turns into a question that remains in his mind, quietly pushing him to think about you and about the connection you once shared more than he did before. When a woman stops reaching out, something deeper than simple silence begins to unfold in a man's mind. At first, he may treat it like a small change in routine. Life is busy, and people sometimes go a few days without talking, but as the silence stretches longer, the emotional space you once filled slowly becomes more noticeable. The absence of your energy begins to reveal how much your presence actually meant in his daily life. Energy in a relationship is not always obvious when it is happening every day. It can appear in small things, short conversations, shared jokes, encouraging messages, or the simple habit of asking how someone's day went. These moments may seem ordinary at the time, but they create a sense of connection that becomes part of a person's emotional environment. When those moments suddenly disappear, the environment changes, and that change is felt even if it is not immediately acknowledged. A man may not realize how much your communication influenced his mood until it is gone. Perhaps you used to send a message in the morning or check in during the evening. Maybe you showed interest in his goals, his work, or the challenges he was facing. Those interactions might have seemed small, but they created a consistent presence in his life. When that presence disappears, there is a quiet shift that begins to take place in his awareness. At first, the difference may show up in subtle ways. He might notice that his phone feels quieter than usual. He might open a conversation thread out of habit, only to realize that nothing new has appeared. These small moments gradually make him aware that something familiar is missing. The absence becomes noticeable not because you announced it, but because your energy was once a regular part of his day. Emotional energy is powerful because it shapes how people experience their relationships. When someone consistently shows care, attention, and warmth, it creates a feeling of being valued. Even if a man does not openly talk about these emotions, he still feels the impact of them. The support and attention you gave may have helped him feel understood or appreciated in ways he did not fully recognize at the time. Once the silence begins, he may slowly start reflecting on those moments. Memories of past conversations might come to mind unexpectedly. He may remember how you reacted to certain stories he shared or how you encouraged him when he was uncertain about something. These memories become more meaningful because they are no longer happening in the present. The mind naturally compares what used to exist with what exists now. Sometimes this reflection creates a realization that he took certain things for granted. When attention and kindness are consistently available, people can become comfortable with them without stopping to consider their value. It is not always intentional, it is simply human nature to adapt to what feels normal. But when that normal routine changes, the mind begins to reevaluate what it once overlooked. The absence of your energy can also create emotional contrast. Before the silence, there may have been regular interaction, laughter, or moments of connection that brought a sense of lightness to his day. Without those interactions, the emotional tone of his routine may feel slightly different. Even if he is surrounded by friends or busy with responsibilities, the specific type of connection you provided is no longer there. This realization often happens gradually rather than all at once. One day, he may simply notice that he has not heard from you in a while. Another day, he might catch himself wondering what you are doing or how your life is going. Over time, these thoughts can grow into a deeper awareness of how much space your presence once occupied in his world. The mind has a natural way of highlighting what is missing. When something meaningful disappears, people begin to see its importance more clearly. A man who once responded casually to your messages may now think about how those conversations made him feel. He might recall the times you supported him or the way you listened when he shared something personal. Your energy may have also created a sense of emotional balance in the relationship. Perhaps you brought positivity, patience, or encouragement that helped smooth over difficult moments. When that energy is no longer present, the balance shifts, and he may begin to understand how much it contributed to the connection between you. In many cases, the silence becomes a mirror that reflects the emotional value of what once existed. It allows him to step back and observe the relationship from a distance. Without constant communication, he has time to think about how the connection developed and what role it played in his life. This period of reflection can lead to new awareness. He might start to recognize that your presence was not just about casual conversation, but about the feeling of being supported and understood. The warmth you brought into the interaction may have created a sense of comfort that he now realizes was meaningful. At the same time, he may also begin to question whether he showed the same level of appreciation while the connection was active. Silence has a way of encouraging self-examination. Without the distraction of daily messages, the mind has room to consider whether certain opportunities for deeper connection were missed. The absence of your energy can therefore become a powerful reminder of the emotional influence you had. It highlights the difference between having someone actively present in your life and experiencing life without that presence. What once felt like an ordinary part of his routine may now appear as something special that he did not fully recognize when it was happening. In that quiet space created by distance and silence, the mind gradually understands that energy in a relationship is not just about words. It is about the feeling someone brings into your life, the way they make everyday moments feel more meaningful, and the sense of connection they create through simple acts of attention and care. When that energy disappears, the absence speaks in its own way, reminding him that your presence once carried a value that is now impossible to ignore. When a woman stops reaching out, it often forces a man into a place of reflection that he may have never experienced before. At first, he might feel a subtle tension in the back of his mind, a smile sense that something is off. Men are not always quick to label their emotions, but they notice patterns, routines, and shifts in behavior. When someone who once consistently communicated with them suddenly stops, it interrupts those patterns, and the mind instinctively tries to make sense of the change. The very act of not reaching out creates a vacuum in his daily life, and a vacuum has a way of drawing attention to itself. In many cases, this silence forces him to consider his own feelings about the relationship. Men often operate with less verbal reflection than women. They might not openly discuss their emotions or process them aloud. But when communication is paused, the absence of interaction leaves space for inner thoughts to surface. he begins asking questions, internally questions about the relationship, about his importance to you, and about what he truly wants. These questions can sometimes be uncomfortable because they demand honesty. Without